This is Africa's misfortune. President Ibrahim Traoré's voice carried both pain and fury in equal measure. His face was stern, yet his eyes radiated unwavering confidence. The conference hall fell into absolute silence as his words echoed through the space. "We are not united," he continued, his voice gaining intensity. "We fail to understand one another. Some nations live in perpetual fear. Others are paralyzed by hesitation. And some have sold their very conscience for temporary comfort and false security." The atmosphere in the room became thick with tension. Journalists exchanged meaningful glances, their pens hovering over notebooks, capturing every word of this extraordinary moment. President Traoré leaned closer to the microphone, his presence commanding absolute attention. "Many African leaders were raised in Europe," he said, his tone growing sharper. "They received their education there, adopted their perspectives there, internalized their worldview there. And when they returned to their homelands, they were placed upon our heads as rulers, not by our choice, but by design. These leaders do not make decisions for their people. Instead, they execute the commands of their masters, those who truly hold their loyalty." The weight of these words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. This was not mere political rhetoric. This was a fundamental challenge to the entire post-colonial order that had governed Africa for generations. President Traoré's jaw tightened as he continued. "When we assumed power, we held hope in our hearts. We believed we would be permitted to govern with genuine independence. Our aspirations were simple yet profound. We wanted the wars to end. We wanted our people to live in peace, to sleep without fear, to wake with hope for tomorrow." His voice took on a bitter edge as he revealed the reality that had confronted him. "But certain powers approached us with a disturbing proposition. They told us explicitly, 'Do not stop the war.' Not yet." Can you comprehend the depravity of such counsel? The room remained silent, but the tension was palpable. Every person present understood they were witnessing something rare, an African leader speaking uncomfortable truths without diplomatic veneer. These external forces, already present within our nation's borders, made their position crystal clear, Traoré continued, his fist clenching. They stated openly that they would provide assistance to the terrorists and simultaneously offer help to us, playing both sides of the same conflict. In that moment of revelation, we understood their true objective. This war was never meant to end. It was designed to be prolonged indefinitely, to keep us weak, divided, and dependent. His palm struck the table with sudden force, making several journalists jump. "That was the moment we made our decision. We expelled all foreign military forces, French, American, all of them. Every last one." Silence descended once more, deeper this time. The magnitude of what he was describing, the audacity of rejecting the very powers that had dominated African politics for decades, was staggering. President Traoré's expression softened slightly, though his voice remained resolute. "We then realized that the real battle was only beginning. We took inventory of our capabilities and found ourselves woefully unprepared. We possessed virtually no weapons, insufficient ammunition, untrained soldiers. For the entire nation, we had a single supply line containing perhaps 100,000 cartridges and merely 100 functional rifles." He paused, as if gathering the threads of painful memories. "We were not ready for war. We lacked resources, experience, training, but we possessed something more valuable. We had faith and determination. These became our true weapons." A slight smile crossed his face, though it carried an undercurrent of bitterness. "Our adversaries calculated that without weapons we would capitulate. They believed poverty of arms would break our spirit. But we made a different decision. If we could not break the chains immediately, we would at the very least refuse to wear them willingly." At that moment, a young soldier in the room stood up, his face reflecting a wave of powerful emotions. President Traoré looked toward him and declared, This right here is our real weapon. This faith, this dignity, this determination. These are the forces with which we will win this struggle." He stepped back from the microphone momentarily, then leaned forward again with renewed intensity. "This battle is not merely about territory or military power. This is a fight for our identity, for the very soul of Africa. As long as even one soldier draws breath, we will not surrender. We will not yield. We will not compromise our fundamental right to exist as free people." Soft applause began to ripple through the hall, growing gradually louder. President Traoré raised his eyes and proclaimed, "I know they wish to break us, to crush our spirit, to force us back into submission. But there is something they do not understand. Burkina Faso is not merely a country. It is an idea, a philosophy, a fire that has ignited against oppression and colonialism, and this fire will not be extinguished. The reality that confronted President Traoré when he assumed power was stark and daunting. The national treasury was empty, warehouses stood barren, the military existed without proper equipment. Soldiers stood at the borders sustained by courage alone, with little else to defend them. But Traoré did not simply speak of ideals. He presented concrete plans. When external doors close, he declared, "You must open your own doors." This became the philosophical foundation of his approach to national defense and economic independence. The initial path was fraught with obstacles. Powerful nations ceased selling weapons to Burkina Faso. Access to international arms markets became virtually impossible. Many countries, succumbing to political pressure from Western powers, began actively obstructing Burkina Faso's efforts to arm and defend itself. But we did not wait passively, Traoré explained. We immediately began searching for alternative routes, domestic sources, regional partnerships, and nations that respected our sovereignty and right to self-determination. These became our new allies. The first priority was restoring basic military capacity, providing soldiers with weapons, protective equipment, and fundamental training. The government redirected budget priorities toward defense procurement, initiating a comprehensive overhaul of military capabilities according to a structured plan. This involved renovating supply chains, simplifying customs and logistics procedures, and establishing small-scale workshops and assembly units throughout the country. These modest facilities would eventually become the foundation for larger manufacturing plants. In a national address, President Traoré articulated his vision. "We cannot perpetually rely on external assistance. If we cannot arm our own soldiers, our defense system will never be sustainable or truly independent. This is not merely about weapons, it is about dignity, sovereignty, and the future of our children." This philosophy illuminated the path toward domestic technological development. Universities and technical institutions were mobilized for defense research and the design of basic equipment and tools. Engineers, mechanics, and workers all began receiving training on home soil. Young people were called to contribute to this new era of national construction. Gradually, transformation became visible. Repair units that once merely maintained equipment began producing small spare parts, filling warehouses with domestically manufactured components. When small arms assembly lines gained momentum, equipment began reaching ordinary soldiers more rapidly. People throughout Burkina Faso began saying, "These are historic moments. Our nation has decided it will no longer remain dependent on others for its most basic security needs." During this period, the second phase of defense industry development commenced, sourcing raw materials and converting domestic resources into weapons manufacturing capacity. President Traoré emphasized, "We possess natural resources in abundance. We simply need to utilize them in an organized, strategic manner." Minerals, iron ore, and other raw materials were channeled into industrial projects with tremendous enthusiasm and dedication. This process not only created employment, but also strengthened the economic foundation of the nation. The development of defense self-sufficiency did not occur overnight. It was a long journey involving learning, making mistakes, and discovering unique solutions suited to Burkina Faso's specific circumstances. But when the first successful experiments yielded results, a small domestically manufactured device, a repair center operating efficiently, a unit performing better than before, a wave of confidence swept through the nation. President Traoré reminded his people, "True strength is not merely in weapons themselves, but in the determination that stands behind those weapons. When you manufacture weapons with your own hands, they cease to be mere metal. They become declarations of national sovereignty and independence. He repeated this message on every platform. This journey is not only about military power. We are building a future where decisions rest in our own hands, where our destiny is written by our own people. He concluded with a rallying cry that became central to Burkina Faso's new practical philosophy. When you create your own weapons, you also write your own destiny. This encapsulated the core mission, breaking external monopolies and nurturing internal strength. But this raised another crucial question: into whose hands should these weapons be placed? If you have tools but those wielding them lack determination and courage, President Traoré observed, they remain merely pieces of metal. Therefore, the second pillar of military success is human capital. Young people who are strong, properly trained, and who carry love for their homeland in their hearts. In the initial days, when shortages of soldiers became apparent on battlefields, the government launched an aggressive recruitment campaign. A target was set to recruit 10,000 to 15,000 new personnel annually, a goal representing not merely numbers but a national commitment and shared responsibility. Recruitment centers opened in villages, neighborhoods, universities, and industrial areas. Every center conveyed a single message: come here, learn, and protect your homeland. But this was not superficial recruitment. President Traoré emphasized, we do not want an army that follows orders blindly. We need soldiers who fight with understanding and conviction. Therefore, the training curriculum was not limited to technical skills, but incorporated intellectual and philosophical foundations. Every recruit was taught that this struggle was not merely about land or wealth. It was about self-respect, sovereignty, and protecting their future. Standards of discipline and performance were kept rigorous. Whenever any unit or commander failed to fulfill responsibilities, strict action was taken: dismissal, disciplinary measures, or court proceedings. The president declared, the mission is sacred. Those who show negligence will not be forgiven. This policy sent an unambiguous message. Accountability would be enforced. Negligence would not be tolerated. Training programs incorporated a new element: field experience. Theory imported from abroad was integrated with practical local conditions. Young commanders received training in village streets, forests, and difficult terrain, precisely where actual combat was occurring. This produced practical expertise that proved more effective than units trained by external forces. Another significant initiative was the VDP, Voluntary Defense Platoons. These units, formed from the local population, took the lead in community security, intelligence gathering, and basic defensive operations. The VDP not only lightened the burden on the regular military, but also created a defense consciousness among the civilian population, the understanding that the security of every village and neighborhood was their own responsibility. To maintain morale and ethical support, the government launched numerous programs: assistance for soldiers' families, treatment for wounded warriors, compensation for martyrs, and efforts to increase public appreciation for the military. When soldiers saw that the state stood behind them, their courage intensified. This not only increased military capacity, but also solidified popular support, creating a bridge connecting the armed forces and the nation. Then came the moment when all these efforts bore visible fruit. Units that previously failed began demonstrating improved performance. Weapons were now available, and soldiers stood stronger and more capable than before. President Traoré viewed this success not as merely technical achievement, but as tangible proof of a nation's elevated spirit. In his words, when people are strong from within, no power can break them. The conclusion of this phase arrived with robust hope. When weapons, training, discipline, and popular support converge, a nation stands with renewed determination and courage. Burkina Faso chose precisely this path. Our defense dreams will be realized through your minds and hands, Traoré declared. This was the moment when the nation's youth understood they were not born merely to study or seek employment. They were guardians of their land. The initial phase began modestly. repairing equipment, cleaning weapons, assembly work in small factories. But President Traoré called this a defense revolution. He argued that even a small component they could manufacture themselves was more powerful than a bullet purchased abroad because it represented their self-respect and capability. After several months, results became visible. Domestically manufactured parts revived old weapons, making them serviceable again. In one village, young mechanics repaired armored vehicles. Elsewhere, local factories began producing communication equipment. Behind all this was a shared passion. We do not depend on others. We are our own protectors. During this period, the government established a new institution, the National Defense Industry Institute. Here, research, production, and training occurred under one roof. President Traoré proclaimed, "We will not beg for others' weapons. We will forge our own rifles." These words electrified the youth. Throughout the country, a new movement began. Made in Burkina Faso became a source of pride. Metalworking, electronics, textiles, even automobile parts, every sector experienced a wave of domestic production. This revolution reduced dependence on foreign trade and opened employment opportunities for citizens. Some Western powers grew alarmed by this transformation. Their embassies and media outlets began propaganda campaigns claiming Burkina Faso was becoming militaristic and dangerous. But President Traoré dismissed these accusations. "We are not a threat. We are an example. We have learned that freedom is not requested. It is built. Those who create their own shield with their own hands can never be enslaved. This progress was not confined to the military. New workshops were established in rural areas. Young people who previously lacked employment now became part of the national defense industry with national pride. Women were included as well, given important roles in engineering, electronics, and logistics. Traoré emphasized, "A nation that does not include its women fights with half its strength." Gradually, Burkina Faso entered a new era. Its weapons were no longer merely metal. They had become a message, self-determination, resistance, and dignity. In one statement, President Traoré declared, "A day will come when our soldiers will take to the field carrying rifles forged from the iron extracted from our own soil. They will know that the weapon in their hands does not belong to another nation. It is made from the soil of their ancestors. That rifle will fire not just at enemies, but at the very concept of slavery itself." This was the moment when Burkina Faso began not merely fighting a war, but forging its own destiny. For the first time, the world witnessed that a small African nation could disturb the sleep of empires through sheer determination. When a Western journalist asked, "Can you win this war?" a momentary silence filled the hall. President Traoré leaned forward slightly, gripped the microphone, and responded in a quiet yet utterly confident tone. "We can win this war because we have no option to surrender." These were not mere political slogans, but the voice of a soldier who had been in the field himself. His expression conveyed resolve. "If we succumb to fear, we will bow. If we bow, we will be erased from existence." His voice carried the hardness of steel. "We face pressure. Enemy numbers are increasing. But we have made our decision. We will not retreat." He promised that Burkina Faso's military would be among the most resilient and steadfast armies in the world. "Our soldiers do not spend days but months in jungles. Sometimes they lack food, sometimes ammunition, but they do not abandon their posts. This is our pride, our honor." He explained that the enemy was changing, that warfare methods were evolving, but Burkina Faso had adapted its strategies accordingly. "We no longer fight with guns alone. We fight with knowledge, with intelligence, with information. We have learned where the enemy comes from, how they operate, and we have learned to defeat them at their own game." At this point, President Traoré made a cryptic statement that left everyone puzzled. "Soon you will see a black albino." Everyone fell silent. A journalist asked, "What does that mean?" President Traoré smiled and replied, "Don't ask now. When the time comes, you will understand." These words were symbolic, an indication that an unprecedented power, a new intellectual revolution was about to emerge. Something that would transform the calculations of enemies entirely. Our enemies call us terrorists, he continued, but they forget that we are the protectors of our own land. This is not a war of religion or race. This is a war for dignity and respect. They want to divide us through sectarian tactics, but every attack only unites us more strongly. He then highlighted the morale of his forces. When I ask a soldier, "Would you want someone else to come and fight in your place?" he responds, "No, sir. This is my duty." That answer is what makes a nation invincible. President Traoré described the new spirit of discipline emerging within the military. If an officer fails, if he does not fulfill his responsibilities, we do not forgive him. This revolution is not only against external enemies, but also against our own internal weaknesses. He emphasized, the outcome of war is not decided only on the battlefield, but in the human heart. When the heart has conviction that it stands for justice, defeat becomes impossible. We have found that conviction. At one emotional moment, he declared, our military previously had no weapons. Now they do. Previously, they lacked confidence. Now they have it. Previously, they stood alone. Now the entire nation stands with them. So tell me, what power can stop us? The room erupted in applause. A slight smile appeared on his face, but his eyes carried that special radiance found only in those who have conquered fear itself. I know our enemies possess wealth, media influence, and intricate conspiracies, he said. But we possess faith. We have our people, and we have this land where our forefathers shed their blood. Anyone who stands for their land cannot be toppled by any worldly power. These words belonged not just to a president, but to a soldier, a leader, and a man of profound conscience. Now the soldiers of Burkina Faso understood they were not merely defenders of a country, they were writing history itself. When the interviewer posed a direct question, "Mr. President, who exactly is attacking Burkina Faso? Is it merely terrorists?" President Traoré took a deep breath, leaned back against his chair, and began speaking slowly and deliberately. This is not simply a war against terrorism, he stated. This is a struggle against systematic exploitation that has been draining Africa's resources for generations. This is the war against those who steal our land, gold, oil, and dignity. He placed his hand firmly on the table, as if every word carried historical weight. I once said that if we learn to utilize our own resources, if we begin managing our own wealth, unemployment will rise in Europe and America because they run their economies on our sweat and blood. His face hardened. It is not just terrorists killing us. The real enemies are those who fund them, who send weapons to insurgents in our northern regions and then speak of peace at political conferences. This is not hypocrisy. This is the new face of slavery. The room was utterly silent. He continued, "This war is the second installment of independence. Our first generation achieved political independence. We received a flag, an anthem, but real freedom, genuine authority over our own land that remains to be won." His tone now carried scholarly intensity. The time has come to understand freedom in new terms. Freedom is not merely liberation from external rulers, but the declaration of internal authority. If we cannot make decisions about our own resources, if we must seek external help for our military, then we are not truly free. President Traoré launched a sharp critique of the Western system. The same powers that claim Africa needs development impose sanctions when we build factories. They do not want us to become self-sufficient, because if Africa awakens, their economies will sleep. He paused before continuing. These are the people who say they will give us development. But the reality is they steal land, water, and dignity from our youth. They give us loans and then seize control of our decision-making. This is not just a war of guns. This is a war of minds and consciousness. Then, in a somewhat gentler tone, he added, "But now we have awakened. We have learned. Freedom is not requested. It is constructed." His words had become a covenant. He delivered a historic statement that would later dominate headlines. If we begin processing our own gold, if we manage our own minerals, the factories in their countries will shut down. They build their wealth from our gold and then call us poor. His eyes held that gleam born not of dreams, but of certainty. This is not merely a war of weapons. This is an ideological battle. This is war against the mindset that claims Africa will always depend on others' mercy. I say no, not anymore. Now we will make our own decisions, whatever price we must pay. Finally, he declared, this war marks the beginning of independence's second chapter. We are protecting not just our borders, but our honor and self-respect. We will no longer be anyone's slaves. Our enemies are not at our doorstep. They are hidden within our own systems. And now we have identified them. Silence filled the room, yet the atmosphere carried a current. A new consciousness, a new awakening. Ibrahim Traoré's words were not merely a speech, but a covenant. A promise that Burkina Faso would now be master of its own gold, its own blood, its own future. Those who smiled and shook hands. President Traoré continued quietly, as if unveiling a secret, were the very ones preparing to stab us in the back. Revolution is never easy. Its enemies are fewer outside than inside. Some sold their conscience for money. Some sacrificed principles for the lust of power. But I have resolved that even if I must sacrifice my life, I will not leave this struggle incomplete. He emphasized that his security lay not in fear or isolation, but in the trust of the people. I trust my nation. That is why I go among them. I do not live in hiding. I visit markets, I go to front lines. I meet with my soldiers because I know that anyone who separates from the people loses legitimacy. He added, we have established a transparent relationship with our citizens. We do not lie to them. If circumstances are difficult, we tell them. If sacrifice is required, we ask for it. This relationship keeps us strong. President Traoré raised a critical point about military training. For years, our armed forces were trained by external powers. They planted seeds of loyalty to foreign interests in our soldiers' minds. They forced them to believe Africa would always remain dependent, but not anymore. He explained that to eliminate this mentality of servitude, a new institution was established, the Higher Military Institute. Here we strengthen our soldiers not just physically but intellectually. We teach them that the enemy's first assault is on your mind. If you remain firm in your worldview, no enemy can break you. His words seemed to pulse with historical significance. As long as our military depends on someone else's training, we are not free. Therefore, we now train our own soldiers on our soil according to our principles, from our perspective. This is why today Burkina Faso's military has become unconquerable. He noted, what troubles Western powers most is that they can no longer control us. They look at us with the same pain a master feels watching his former slave walk free. A sense of calm crossed his face. I know dangers abound. But when someone believes in their mission, danger loses its power. I have decided, either I will see my nation completely free, or I will give my life on this path. His final statement resonated. When you walk the path of revolution, there is no room for fear. Death kills only the body, but fear enslaves the soul, and I will never allow my soul to be enslaved. This was the moment when those present realized they were not merely listening to a president, but to a soldier, a teacher, and a living ideology. For Burkina Faso, this leadership was not just politics. It was a covenant that no power could bend this nation. When President Traoré declared that Africa must train its own military, it was not simply a defense statement. It was a proclamation that a new era had begun. His tone carried the conviction found only in leaders who have risen above fear and established faith in themselves. If you lack a strong military, you do not possess a state, he asserted. A nation that depends on others for protection is not a nation. It is a colony. This statement struck everyone present like lightning. Traoré understood that for centuries, the West had convinced Africa it was incapable of self-defense. But now that belief was shattering. He reminded them, when foreign military forces came to train African nations, they took pride in belittling our soldiers. They viewed us like children, as if they were masters, and we were pupils. But circumstances have changed. Now major world powers want to learn from us. They want to understand how we fight, how we organize, how we maintain control over our resources. These words were not mere pride, but acknowledgement of reality. Now, Burkina Faso's training centers welcomed foreign military observers wanting to understand this African model that, despite limited resources, had pushed back enemies. "This is now our secret," Traoré explained. "No one knows how we train our commandos, how we prepare them, what strategic philosophy guides our work. And this is our true strength, secrecy, and self-confidence. Africa's real revolution is not in guns, but in thinking," he emphasized. "They want us to speak their language, make decisions by their principles, take orders from their institutions. But now we will think with our own minds." His eyes sparkled. "Africa possesses not only resources but intelligence. The only difference is that now we have begun using our own intellect." He declared, "Nations that survive on the world map are those possessing their own military, their own economy, and their own thought system. We have begun building all three." According to him, Africa's biggest challenge is no longer external enemies but eliminating the mentality of slavery from within. At this point, he referenced a statement by a Western general. An American general recently said African countries should not possess too many weapons. Traoré laughed. "This is the same logic a slave hears from his master. You don't need strength. You only need protection, our protection." A ripple of laughter spread through the hall, but President Traoré's face maintained its serious composure. "Look," he said, "when you build your own strength, they perceive you as a threat. But this is not threat, this is awakening. Burkina Faso will not wait for anyone's permission. We stand on our own land. We will manufacture our own rifles from our own iron and secure our borders with our people's determination." He then raised another historic point: African unity. "Our revolution is not just Burkina Faso's. This is a message for Mali, Niger, Chad, Ghana, Senegal, and all nations shackled in chains of slavery for centuries. Together we will build an Africa that does not await anyone's commands." The eyes of young people in the hall began to shine. They felt that Traoré was no longer merely a president of one country. He had become the voice of an entire awakening continent. His words carried that fire which awakens sleeping nations. In his concluding statement, he proclaimed, "If Africa changes its thinking, the world will change. If we build our own military, no power can subjugate us. And if we unite, the day is not far when the world map will recognize us not as periphery, but as center." The applause that erupted in the hall at that moment confirmed that revolution in Africa's heart was no longer a dream, it had become reality. When the thunder of revolution subsided slightly, when enemy convoys retreated, President Traoré turned his attention to another front, the internal enemy. He understood that wars fought with guns eventually end, but corruption is poison that consumes a nation's soul. "The most difficult task after winning a war," he stated, "is cleansing your own institutions. Identifying enemies is easy, but those faces that smile while looting, they are the most dangerous." The president presented a major plan for governmental reform. His first principle was simple yet strict: leadership must lead by example. If leaders themselves wallow in luxury, you cannot expect sacrifice from the people. Following this statement, he imposed restrictions on ministerial expenditures, reduced the number of government vehicles, eliminated unnecessary foreign trips, and ordered every government official to publicly declare their assets. After this decree, many familiar faces began disappearing from the system. "I do not want my country to be a place where rulers drink expensive wine while ordinary women fetch water from rivers," he declared. "It is shameful that government offices have electricity while villages remain in darkness." This statement became a rallying cry throughout Burkina Faso. People began saying, "Our president eats what we eat, wears what we wear." He launched direct attacks on corruption's biggest strongholds: public procurement, financial institutions, and bureaucracy. "The greatest rot flourishes where tenders and budgets converge," he observed. "Every project becomes a commission. Every development plan transforms into bribery." He announced, No tender will be awarded without transparent procedures. Every project's details will be in public record. Then came the sector he called the worst mafia, the tax system. He ordered complete digitalization, electronic invoicing, automated receipts, online payment systems. When he made this announcement, major business circles panicked. Those who do not want transparency in the system are actually thieves, Traoré stated bluntly. If you are honest, why fear the light? These reforms were not easy. Several interest groups grew angry. Propaganda spread through media outlets. External powers began calling him a dictator. But Traoré did not retreat. I don't care, he said. I know nations that speak truth stand alone at first. He then took a remarkable step, popular participation. Local committees were formed in every province, including farmers, workers, teachers, and women. These committees received authority to decide which projects were necessary in their regions. This initiative directly reconnected government and people. During this period, he also revolutionized agriculture. Burkina Faso's greatest treasure is its land. Subsidies were provided to farmers. Machinery was supplied, and a new system was created where the government purchased surplus production and sold it at reduced prices in impoverished areas. If farmers are content, the nation is secure, he explained. A hungry person doesn't pick up a gun, he asks for bread. We must give him bread with dignity. This anti-corruption campaign created a new atmosphere in government offices. Now officials think before signing anything, knowing they will be held accountable for mistakes. Traoré clarified. We have not established a system of fear but of responsibility. The difference lies in intention. We work not for punishment, but for reform. These steps gradually became the foundation of a new paradigm, a model of ethical governance. Experts from around the world began visiting to observe how Burkina Faso initiated the journey of purging its system from corruption in just a few years. President Traoré concluded, "A day will come when Burkina Faso's name will be known not for wealth but for integrity, and that day is approaching." With these words, the entire assembly stood. Applause resonated, and a new philosophy, a new promise was recorded in Burkina Faso's atmosphere. This was the moment when an African nation demonstrated to the world, revolutions are won not just with guns, but with honest hearts. When the interviewer asked near the conclusion, "Mr. President, what is the ultimate destination of this revolution?" Ibrahim Traoré fell silent. His eyes held that serenity found only on the faces of those who have identified their destination. Then, in a quiet tone, he replied, "The purpose of revolution is not power. It is justice. If the justice system is weak, revolution remains incomplete." He explained that freedom's meaning is not merely liberation from external enemies, but also delivering justice to the people. We observed that for years, the court system had become a plaything in the hands of the powerful. For the poor, justice was a dream. For the wealthy, a weapon. Traoré initiated judicial reforms. Every case, every judge, every decision now followed transparent procedures. Now a judge's pen is not in someone's pocket, but in his conscience, he declared. Under his orders, public complaint centers were established where ordinary citizens could file complaints against government officials, police, even ministers. Government exists to serve people. People are not government's slaves. With this spirit, he launched welfare programs, affordable housing for poor families, small loans for rural women, skill development institutes for youth. All became part of his revolutionary philosophy. Revolution succeeds when worry lines disappear from a mother's face, when a laborer's child also attends school, when farmers sell their crops with pride, he said. He called education revolution's true spark. Schools and training centers began construction throughout every region of Burkina Faso. African history was included in curriculum so new generations could recognize their roots. When you know where you came from, only then can you decide where you're going, he emphasized. Addressing youth, he stated, "You were taught that progress means adopting Western lifestyles. But I say progress lies in recognizing your own identity." President Traoré also spoke passionately about African unity. "We formed a confederation with Mali and Niger. But this is merely the beginning. My dream is a united Africa where borders are not walls but open doors. For him, African unity was not only political but spiritual and intellectual. We all share the same pain: looted resources, divided hearts, partitioned history. Now is the time to give our continent one voice. He directly challenged Western powers. They divide us to keep us weak. But when Africa unites, the world's balance will shift. The day is not far when our decisions will be made in our own capitals, not in Paris, London, or Washington. He concluded his discussion with a profoundly powerful statement. I know my path is dangerous. I am surrounded by conspiracies. There are enemies of my life. But my faith tells me that before death, one task will certainly be completed. This nation will reclaim its dignity. He continued, even if I am no longer here, this torch will not be extinguished. Someone else will rise after me, because this revolution is not mine, it belongs to the nation. Hearing this, the young people in the hall stood up. Some placed hands over their hearts. Tears filled the eyes of others. Everyone realized they were not merely listening to a politician, but to the representative of a movement, a living embodiment of a people's aspirations. I want future generations to know, President Traoré declared, his voice resonating with emotion, that we fought not just against enemies, but against injustice, poverty, and slavery itself. And we will prevail because a nation that recognizes its true identity cannot be defeated. The hall drowned in the echo of applause, which transformed into a chant. Long live Burkina Faso! Long live Africa! That moment was inscribed in history. A young president, an awakened nation, and an entire magnificent continent rising from the sleep of slavery. Ibrahim Traoré had become more than just a name. He had become a symbol of the belief that when faith, dignity, and justice unite, Africa can once again become the sun that illuminates the world. As the press conference drew toward its natural conclusion, President Traoré took a moment to reflect on the broader philosophical implications of Burkina Faso's transformation. His voice, though quieter now, carried no less conviction. Many speak of independence, he began, but few understand its true meaning. Independence is not a ceremony where you lower one flag and raise another. It is not singing a national anthem while your treasury remains controlled by foreign banks. It is not celebrating sovereignty while your military takes orders from distant capitals. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the faces before him. True independence is awakening each morning knowing that the decisions affecting your children's future are made by people who share their blood, their soil, their destiny. It is the ability to say no to powers that once seemed invincible. It is the courage to walk a difficult path rather than accept a comfortable slavery. The journalists in the room had stopped taking notes. They were simply listening, absorbing the weight of his words. When we expelled foreign military bases, Traoré continued, we were not being reckless or suicidal, as some claimed. We were simply insisting on a basic principle. A sovereign nation does not host foreign armies on its soil unless it chooses to, unless those forces serve its interests, unless the relationship is one of equals, not master and servant. President Traoré then shifted to what he called the economic chains that bind tighter than any military occupation. Consider the cruel irony, he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. Burkina Faso sits atop gold reserves worth billions. Our soil contains minerals essential to modern technology. Yet our people remain among the poorest in the world. How is this possible? He answered his own question. Because we were taught to extract these resources and immediately ship them abroad for processing. We were told we lacked the capacity, the knowledge, the infrastructure to add value ourselves. So we sold raw gold for pennies and bought back jewelry for fortunes. We extracted rare minerals and purchased back smartphones and computers at inflated prices. His fist came down on the table again, but this time with measured control rather than anger. This is the economic model of colonialism, adapted for the modern era. They call it free trade and comparative advantage. We call it theft, disguised with sophisticated terminology. President Traoré described the steps. Burkina Faso was taking to break this cycle. We are building processing facilities so that our gold leaves this country as finished products, not raw ore. We are training our people in the technical skills needed to add value at every stage of production. We are creating joint ventures with nations that treat us as partners, not as resources to be exploited. He acknowledged the resistance this approach generated. The international financial institutions threaten us with isolation. They warn that investors will flee. They predict economic collapse. But we have made a calculation. Short-term hardship is preferable to permanent dependency. Temporary pain is better than perpetual humiliation. The president then addressed what he termed the colonization of the mind, perhaps the most insidious legacy of imperialism. They did not just steal our resources, he said quietly, almost sadly. They convinced us that our own cultures were primitive, that our languages were inferior, that our histories were irrelevant. They taught us to see ourselves through their eyes, to measure our worth by their standards, to aspire to their definitions of success. He described walking through villages where children could recite European capitals but didn't know their own ethnic group's history, where young people spoke fluent French but stumbled over their ancestral languages, where traditional knowledge systems were dismissed as superstition while foreign expertise was accepted without question. This is why our revolution must be cultural as well as economic and military, Traoré explained. We are reviving our languages, recording our oral histories, honoring our traditional knowledge. Not because we reject all things foreign, we are not isolationists or xenophobes, but because a people disconnected from their roots cannot grow strong branches. He spoke of new curricula being developed that taught African history from African perspectives, of cultural centers being established to preserve traditional arts, music, and crafts, of policies promoting local languages in government and education alongside French. Our children will know that Africa was not a dark continent waiting to be enlightened by Europe, he declared. They will learn of the ancient kingdoms, the sophisticated trading networks, the achievements in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine that flourished here long before colonization. They will understand that we were not saved by colonialism, we were interrupted by it. President Traoré devoted significant attention to women's role in the transformation of Burkina Faso, a topic often overlooked in military and political discussions. I have heard some, including from our own society, question why we involve women in defense matters, in heavy industry, in what they call men's work, he said. My answer is simple. A revolution that excludes half its population is not a revolution. It is a continuation of oppression in new clothing. He pointed to concrete examples. Women now comprise a growing percentage of our military, not in token positions or support roles only, but as combat soldiers, officers, strategists. They work in our weapons factories. They lead community defense committees. They sit on planning councils determining our nation's direction. The president shared a personal observation. I have noticed something interesting. In meetings where difficult decisions must be made, it is often the women who ask the most penetrating questions. They want to know how policies will affect families, children, communities, not in abstract terms, but in lived reality. This grounding in practical consequences makes for better governance. He acknowledged cultural resistance. Yes, there are those who claim this violates our traditions. I ask them, which traditions? The traditions where women managed trade networks across the Sahara, where queen mothers held significant political power, or the traditions imposed during colonial rule to make our societies more compatible with European patriarchy. Traoré emphasized that gender equality was not a Western import, but a recovery of African values. Before colonization disrupted our societies, many African communities accorded women substantial authority and respect. We are not copying the West, we are reclaiming our own heritage. The president's eyes brightened when discussion turned to young people, clearly a source of hope and energy for him. Our youth are not a problem to be managed, but a force to be unleashed, he stated emphatically. For too long, we treated young Africans as dependents waiting to be given opportunities. I say they are not waiting. They are ready to create opportunities if we remove the barriers holding them back. He described programs initiated under his leadership. We are providing land to young farmers, capital to young entrepreneurs, equipment to young inventors, not as charity but as investment, not with conditions that benefit foreign interests, but with the simple expectation that they will build something meaningful. President Traoré spoke with particular passion about technical education. University degrees are valuable, but we also need skilled electricians, mechanics, welders, computer technicians, agricultural specialists. We are expanding vocational training, making it respected and well compensated, because these are the skills that will build our nation's infrastructure. He addressed the brain drain directly. Many of our brightest young people flee to Europe or America, not because they hate Africa, but because they see no future here. We are working to change that calculation. If a young engineer can earn a decent living, work with modern equipment, and contribute to meaningful projects at home, why would she risk her life crossing the Mediterranean? The president acknowledged this remained a work in progress. We cannot yet match the salaries offered in wealthy nations, but we can offer something they cannot: the chance to be part of a historic transformation, to build your own nation rather than enriching someone else's. This appeals to more young people than you might imagine. Traoré then expanded his vision beyond Burkina Faso's borders, articulating a theory of African unity grounded in practical strategic considerations rather than romantic Pan-Africanism. Some dismiss calls for African unity as naive idealism, he observed. They point to our differences in language, religion, ethnicity, and governance systems. They highlight historical conflicts and current tensions. All of this is true. Unity will not be easy. He leaned forward with intensity. But consider the alternative. Separately, we are weak. Our economies are small, our militaries limited, our diplomatic influence negligible. We can be bullied, manipulated, played against each other. Together, we represent over 1 billion people, immense natural resources, and a continent that is strategically vital. Together, we cannot be ignored. The president detailed the alliance of Sahel states, the confederation formed with Mali and Niger. This is our laboratory for African unity. We are harmonizing defense policies, coordinating economic strategies, facilitating free movement of people and goods. It is imperfect and faces many challenges, but it is real, not merely a declaration signed at a summit and then forgotten. He addressed concerns about sovereignty. Some fear that regional integration means sacrificing national independence. I argue the opposite. In today's world, small nations acting alone have less true sovereignty than larger blocs acting in coordination. The European Union understands this. ASEAN understands this. Why should Africa remain fragmented? Traoré acknowledged the suspicion his regional ambitions generated in some quarters. Western powers are comfortable with Africa divided into small, weak states dependent on external powers. An integrated, self-sufficient Africa threatens this comfortable arrangement. This is why they work to undermine regional cooperation, funding separatist movements and amplifying local conflicts. The president then addressed a dimension of modern conflict often overlooked, the battle for narrative control. We are fighting wars on multiple fronts, he explained. There is the military struggle against armed groups. There is the economic battle to control our resources. But perhaps most important is the information war, the fight to tell our own story rather than having it told for us. He described the challenge with clear frustration. When we achieve a military victory, international media either ignores it or attributes it to luck or temporary setbacks for insurgents. When we suffer losses, it is headline news analyzed as evidence of our incompetence. When we implement reforms, they are dismissed as authoritarian measures. When we maintain policies they dislike, we are dictators. When we change policies they opposed, we have capitulated to pressure. Traoré was particularly critical of how African agency is erased from coverage. Notice how reports are framed. It is never Burkinabe forces defeat terrorist attack. It is violence continues in the region, as if it is a natural disaster rather than a conflict with clear actors and stakes. We are perpetually described as victims to be pitied or problems to be solved, never as active agents shaping our own destiny. The president outlined efforts to counter this narrative dominance. We are training our own journalists, supporting local media outlets, using social media to communicate directly with African and global audiences. We are inviting independent observers to witness our reality rather than accepting second-hand reports filtered through hostile intermediaries. He was realistic about the challenges. We cannot match the resources of international media conglomerates. But we have something they lack: authenticity and proximity to the truth. Over time, this matters. As the interview extended beyond its scheduled time, the moderator asked President Traoré to define what success would look like for Burkina Faso's revolution. He thought carefully before responding, "I do not expect to create paradise. That is not within human capacity. But I hope to build a nation where certain basics are assured, where children can attend school without fear of kidnapping, where farmers can work their fields without terror of attack, where young people see a future worth staying for, where the elderly are cared for with dignity." He continued, "I hope for a Burkina Faso where government officials are servants, not masters, where courts deliver justice regardless of wealth or connections, where police protect rather than prey upon citizens, where the national wealth benefits the nation, not just a small elite and their foreign patrons." Traoré's voice took on a reflective quality. "I hope for an Africa that stands among the world's regions not as a supplicant, begging for aid or a victim requiring rescue, but as a partner offering trade, cooperation, and mutual respect on equal terms. An Africa that contributes to global culture, science, and philosophy as it did in ancient times and can again." He acknowledged the distance between current reality and this vision. "We have far to go. The challenges are immense. Poverty, illiteracy, disease, corruption, violence, these will not disappear quickly. But the direction matters as much as the speed. We are moving toward dignity and self-determination. That is success in itself." In a rare moment of personal vulnerability, President Traoré addressed the constant threats to his life and what that meant for his leadership. "I receive intelligence reports," he said quietly. "I know there are plots against me. Some foreign-sponsored, some domestic, some a combination. I know that powerful interests would prefer I disappear permanently." He paused, and the room was utterly silent. "I have made peace with this reality, not because I welcome death. I love life, I love my family, I want to see my children grow, but because I understand that the work is bigger than any individual. If fear of death paralyzed me, I could accomplish nothing." The president's voice strengthened. "This is why I refuse to hide behind walls and guards to govern from a fortified palace. I go among the people. I visit soldiers at frontline positions. I appear in public despite the risks. Because leadership that cowers in fear loses legitimacy and moral authority." He turned philosophical. "What legacy do I want? Not monuments or my name on buildings. I want Burkinabe children to grow up in a country that respects them. I want the youth to feel that extraordinary pride that comes from building something meaningful. I want elders to see, before they pass, that the sacrifices of their generation were not in vain." Traoré concluded this reflection with characteristic defiance. "If they kill me tomorrow, I will die knowing I remained faithful to my principles and my people. That is a privilege most leaders never experience. And my death will not stop this movement. It will fuel it. Martyrdom creates more revolutionaries than any speech ever." Could the interviewer asked what president Traoré would say to leaders in other African nations contemplating similar transformations. "First, understand that this is not a path to popularity," he responded bluntly. "Western governments will condemn you. International media will vilify you. Global financial institutions will threaten you. Some of your own elite will betray you. You must be prepared for isolation, pressure, and constant attacks." He leaned back, considering his next words carefully. "But here is what I have learned. This pressure reveals its own limits. They can sanction you, but they cannot starve you if you develop food self-sufficiency. They can cut you off from their weapons, but they cannot disarm you if you build domestic defense capacity. They can freeze your foreign accounts, but they cannot bankrupt you if your economy is not dependent on their financial systems." President Traoré's advice grew more specific. Start with what you control. You may not be able to transform the economy overnight, but you can clean up government procurement. You may not be able to build advanced industries immediately, but you can support small-scale manufacturing. You may not be able to rival foreign militaries, but you can train disciplined, motivated forces. He emphasized incremental progress. Every small victory builds confidence. When people see that domestic initiatives can succeed, that corruption can be fought, that foreign dependency can be reduced, they begin to believe transformation is possible. This psychological shift is as important as any policy change. The president also urged patience. Changes I described took years to implement and are still incomplete. Leaders seeking quick results will fail and become discouraged. This is generational work. You may not live to see the full realization of your vision, but you can lay foundations others will build upon. In a surprising turn, President Traoré addressed the spiritual and psychological aspects of decolonization, a topic rarely discussed in political interviews. Colonialism, he began, was not just a political and economic system. It was a comprehensive assault on African consciousness. It taught us to see ourselves as inferior, to view our cultures as backward, to internalize the colonial gaze. Political independence did not automatically undo this psychological damage. He described it as colonization of the mind and spirit, more subtle but perhaps more enduring than physical occupation. You can remove foreign troops and flag, but the foreign voice in your head that whispers, "You are not capable, you are not worthy," remains. Overcoming this internal colonization is perhaps our greatest challenge. President Traoré spoke of the need for spiritual decolonization. This means reclaiming our narratives, celebrating our achievements, refusing to accept the categories and hierarchies imposed by colonial thinking. It means recognizing that different societies can organize themselves differently without one being advanced and another primitive. He was careful to distinguish this from narrow nationalism or xenophobia. We do not claim perfection or superiority. We simply insist on our right to define ourselves, to honor our ancestors, to practice our values. We can learn from all civilizations, including Western civilization, while maintaining our distinct identity. The president connected this to contemporary politics. When we expelled French forces, it was not because we hate France or French people. It was because the relationship had become a parent-child dynamic rather than a partnership of equals. We needed to prove to ourselves that we could secure our own nation. This was as much a psychological necessity as a military. 1. President Traoré addressed various criticisms, leveled against his government with remarkable candor, on accusations of authoritarianism. I do not claim to run a perfect democracy. In the midst of existential conflict, certain emergency measures are necessary. But ask yourselves, who defines democracy? Is it democratic when foreign powers dictate a nation's policies through economic coercion? Is it democratic when elections are held but real power remains in the hands of external actors and domestic compradors? He continued, I believe in accountability, in limiting executive power, in protecting civil liberties. But these principles must be implemented in our context, not according to templates designed for stable, wealthy nations with no immediate security threats. We are writing our own democratic playbook suited to our circumstances. On human rights concerns, every security force action is reviewed. We have procedures for complaints against military and police, but understand the environment we operate in. Terrorist groups that deliberately target civilians, that use human shields, that hide in populated areas. Mistakes happen and we investigate them, but I will not apologize for defending our people from those who murder school children and burn villages. Regarding economic management, some international financial experts claim our policies are unsustainable, perhaps by their metrics focused on debt-to-GDP ratios and credit ratings. But those metrics do not capture everything that matters. Food security, domestic manufacturing capacity, reduced foreign dependency. These create resilience that balance sheets miss. The president was particularly sharp in addressing Western media criticism. I find it remarkable that journalists from nations built on colonialism, slavery, and resource extraction lecture us about ethics, that representatives of countries currently bombing multiple nations speak to us about human rights. that economies sustained by exploiting global South labor criticize our development model. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. A young Burkinabe journalist asked a pointed question. Mr. President, your leadership has catalyzed these changes. But what happens when you are no longer president? How do you ensure this transformation outlasts your tenure? President Traoré smiled, clearly appreciating the question's directness. This is exactly the right concern. Revolutions that depend entirely on one individual are fragile. Personality cults are dangerous. So we are building institutions, not just following a leader. He enumerated specific measures. We are training a new generation of military officers in our own academies with our values. We are educating young people in schools that teach African history and critical thinking. We are creating economic structures that benefit broad segments of society, not just elites, so multiple groups have a stake in maintaining reforms. We are decentralizing power so local communities have real authority. The president acknowledged the challenge. I cannot guarantee that future leaders will continue this path. Politics is unpredictable, but I can ensure that reversing course becomes difficult and costly. When farmers are producing more food, when factories are employing workers, when soldiers are equipped with domestic weapons, when people have experienced dignity, going back to dependency will face popular resistance. He added a thought about regional integration. This is another reason why the alliance of Sahel states matters. If similar transformations are happening simultaneously in multiple countries, they reinforce each other. It becomes harder for external powers to isolate and pressure any single nation. It becomes more difficult for compradors to reverse changes in one country when neighbors are moving forward. President Traoré concluded thoughtfully, ultimately, no leader can guarantee the future. I can only plant seeds and hope they take root. But I believe we have ignited something in the consciousness of our people, particularly our youth, that will be hard to extinguish. Once people taste genuine independence, they do not easily accept returning to servitude. As the extended interview drew toward its conclusion, President Traoré was asked to articulate his ultimate vision, not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa as a whole in the coming decades. He took a long breath before responding. I see an Africa that is politically unified, at least in terms of common security and economic frameworks. Not necessarily a single government, our diversity is valuable, but coordinated policies that leverage our collective strength. His vision expanded. I see an Africa that has industrialized, that processes its own resources, that manufactures its own goods, where value is added on the continent rather than exported as raw materials. Where African technology companies compete globally, where African pharmaceutical companies produce medicines for our diseases, where African agricultural science feeds our people and exports surpluses on our terms. President Traoré's eyes gleamed with passion. I see an Africa that is environmentally sustainable, that leapfrogs the destructive development path followed by industrialized nations. We have the opportunity to build green industries, renewable energy systems, and circular economies from the beginning. We need not repeat their mistakes, he continued. I see an Africa that is culturally confident, that contributes to global arts, literature, music, and philosophy not as exotic curiosities but as equal participants in world culture. Where our languages are respected, our histories are taught globally. Our perspectives are sought on international questions. On governance, he offered, I see an Africa with accountable leadership, where governments serve people rather than exploit them, where corruption is anomaly, not norm, where courts deliver justice regardless of who you know, where peaceful transitions of power are routine, where civil society is vibrant and protected. President Traoré's voice grew softer but no less intense. I see an Africa at peace with itself, where borders do not divide communities, where ethnic and religious diversity is celebrated rather than weaponized, where conflicts are resolved through dialogue, where refugees can return home. He acknowledged the ambition of this vision. I will not live to see all of this realized. Perhaps my children will not, but generations build upon generations. We are laying foundations. Others will construct the building. What matters is that we have begun, that we have shown it is possible, that we have refused to accept permanent subordination as inevitable destiny. In his concluding statement, President Ibrahim Traoré stood from his seat, his military uniform crisp, his bearing proud, his voice clear and unwavering. "I want to speak directly to young Africans watching this," he said, looking into the cameras. "You have been told lies your entire lives. You have been told that Africa is poor, but we sit on trillions of dollars in resources. You have been told we are incapable, but Africans excel in every field when given opportunity. You have been told we need saving, but we need only to be left alone to build our own futures." His voice intensified. "The poverty you see is not natural. It is engineered. The conflicts are not tribal inevitability. They are orchestrated. The dependency is not inherent. It is imposed. Once you understand this, everything changes. Anger replaces despair. Determination replaces resignation. Action replaces passivity." President Traoré pointed emphatically, "You are not victims. You are heirs to great civilizations. Your ancestors built kingdoms that thrived for centuries. They developed sophisticated systems of governance, trade, and knowledge. That genius runs in your blood. The question is whether you will reclaim it or continue accepting the false narratives that keep you subjugated." He offered a direct challenge. "Some of you will criticize me. Some will disagree with my methods. That is fine, healthy even. But I ask you this, what is your alternative? Will you accept the status quo? Will you keep begging for aid that comes with chains? Will you keep allowing others to make decisions about your future? Or will you stand up, take risks, and fight for your dignity?" The president's tone became almost conversational. "I am not a perfect leader. I have made mistakes. I will make more. But I am trying, truly trying, to serve my people rather than to serve myself. I am attempting to build something that outlasts my time. I am fighting for a vision that terrifies those who profit from Africa's exploitation. That, I believe, counts for something." He concluded with words that would be replayed countless times across the continent. "To my fellow Africans, the liberation of our continent will not come from foreign saviors or international organizations. It will come from us when we decide we have had enough, when we find courage to say no to those who have dominated us, when we build our own institutions and systems. That process has begun. The question is whether you will be part of it or watch from the sidelines. Choose wisely. History is watching." President Ibrahim Traoré stepped back from the microphone. The room erupted, not with polite applause, but with a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Journalists abandoned professional detachment. Some were in tears. Others raised fists in solidarity. They knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a political interview, but a declaration of intent that would reverberate far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. As the president left the hall, flanked by security but stopping to shake hands and embrace supporters, a new narrative was being born. For too long, Africa's story had been told by others. Now, a young military officer from a small West African nation had seized the pen and begun writing a different ending. Whether that ending would be triumph or tragedy remained unknown. The forces arrayed against him were powerful, experienced, and ruthless. The challenges facing Burkina Faso and Africa were immense and deeply rooted. Success was far from guaranteed, but something had shifted. A possibility had been articulated. A path had been illuminated. And across the continent, in urban internet cafes and rural village squares, young Africans were watching, listening, and beginning to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, a different future was possible after all. The sun was setting over Ouagadougou, casting long shadows across the city. But for many watching President Ibrahim Traoré's interview, it felt not like an ending, but like a dawn, the first light of a new day for Africa, uncertain and challenging but filled with possibility, and in that moment, the spirit of true independence, so long deferred, seemed within reach at last, and